Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. If this is your first time here, my name is Jody and I love watches. If you also love watches, perhaps you'd like to subscribe to the channel by hitting the button down in the bottom corner of the screen. Bit of a special video today because this is my first video review of a Rolex, the big R, the mighty Rolex. I'm going to get up close and personal with this one, a current model Air King, in just a couple of minutes or so. If you're just here to see the Air King, please feel free to skip ahead. You'll find some nice high quality close-ups, dimensions and specifications. You'll find a lume video and a couple of different wrist shots as well. Help yourself. However, as this is my first Rolex review, I thought I'd spend a little longer on the introduction today, ask and answer 3 key questions before flipping the camera and getting on with the review. What do I think of Rolex as a brand? Do I aspire to Rolex ownership? And if I do, which Rolexes do I aspire to owning? Well, the Rolex brand and its plethora of watches I'm sure needs little introduction, so I'm not going to be giving you a 115-year potted history of Rolex today. No sepia-tinged photos of watchmakers of yesteryear drifting gently across the screen. I'll leave that to the other guys. Now, I'm a motorsport guy, so Rolex as a brand is pretty much everywhere, whether it's the Daytona 24-hour, the Le Mans 24-hour, or my own true love, Formula 1. Rolex is front and centre and has been for many, many years. Indeed, the canniest of canny Scots, Sir Jackie Stewart, has been wearing and touting Rolexes since the late 1960s, so they're always a brand that has been at the very forefront of my mind when it comes to thinking about Swiss luxury watches. And as I said, the watches themselves are fantastic, fully made in-house with great detail, care and attention. Much of what Rolex do, they still do by hand. I'm sure some of you watching are either from Singapore or have been to Singapore. Perhaps then you have been to the Ion Orchard shopping mall on Orchard Road. It is pretty much paradise for watch guys and girls. It also presents what I think is an incredibly interesting, literally a vertical stratification of the entire watch industry, spread across 6 floors. Down at the bottom, you've got a whole bunch of fashion brands. You've also got Swatch lurking down there. A little further up, you've got the likes of Tissot. 1 floor above Tissot, you've got what I would consider to be the big names: Tag, Panerai, Omega and Rolex as the king of the floor. However, believe it or not, there are 3 whole floors of watches beyond that. Next up, you've got Lang & Son, Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin. You've also got 2 floors beyond that. If you want to spend $250,000 on a diamond encrusted tourbillon that is little more than a display of your conspicuous consumption and lack of taste, that's the place for you. Personally, I kind of tap out at the floor with Rolex, and Rolex is king of that floor. So Rolex, therefore, probably the top brand for me. Certainly, I can't see myself ever owning something beyond a Rolex. So, do I aspire to owning a Rolex then? This one doesn't belong to me, it belongs to a friend of mine, the mysterious Mr. X. I looked at a couple of luxury pieces of his outstanding collection to this point already. Now, Mr. X owns 14 Rolexes. He considers them to be money on his wrist and pretty much money in the bank. I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Now, I've made over 170 videos so far on the channel, and I don't think I've ever used the word grail or the term grail watch. Perhaps that's not me as an individual, perhaps that's not me as a watch collector. I'm a bit too impulsive. I'm not really the type of guy to squirrel money away, to scrimp and save, to make cost savings elsewhere in my life in order that I buy a watch. Also, I am fortunate enough to own a couple of luxury watches already that simply don't get enough wrist time. Can I see myself therefore making sacrifices and hoarding cash in order to buy a Rolex in the future? Perhaps, perhaps not. I will say that this Air King is arguably unique. All the watches that I've reviewed on the channel, this is the only one that is going to be worth more in 10 years than it costs today. So from that perspective, that's what Mr. X is going on about. These things appreciate in value, especially some of the more unusual models. Perhaps the Air King will find itself in that collectible bracket in the years to come. So if I kind of do, kind of don't aspire to Rolex ownership in the future, which models do I kind of and kind of not aspire to owning? What about the Air King? I don't think so. I don't think this is your first Rolex. I think this is one for aficionados and collectors. Perhaps this is a Rolex if it's your third, fourth, or even fifth Rolex, and I'll talk about the reasons for that a little later on. So then, what would I be going for? Well, number one on my shopping list is the Rolex Submariner. An absolute classic. I've looked at so many homages of the Submariner on the channel so far already. Perhaps I will own one of the originals at some point in the future, but they are bloody expensive. A little cheaper than that is the Rolex Explorer, almost as iconic as the Submariner, but a little more refined, a little more withdrawn, a little more discreet, which is something that I really appreciate. Also appreciated for its value equation is their new entry-level model, the Oyster Perpetual. One of these with a black dial, white dial, very, very tempting, if not cheap, at nearly 7,000 Aussie dollars. Alright then, Jody, that's quite enough waffle for one day. Flip the camera and show us the bloody Rolex. Finally, I can stop talking around this watch and start talking about this watch. And I really ought to start talking about the price, shouldn't I? Now, you will not find a link in the description of this video as to where you should buy this one. I do not suggest you go grey market for a Rolex. If you're interested in one of these, you are buying it from your high street, your shopping mall, your luxury boutique Rolex dealer, and good luck getting a discount from them. As far as I'm aware, you are not going to get a discount on a steel bracelet sports model Rolex. My advice, therefore, is to drink as much of their French champagne and Scottish whiskey as you possibly can, while just about retaining the ability to sign the credit card bill at the end of the experience. And how much, if you can read it, will that credit card bill come to? Well, the Australian price is $7,850. In US dollars, that comes to just under 6,000, and in Great British pounds, that's about 4,500. Please let me know if there's a bit of regional variation, but I'd imagine Rolex keep their pricing pretty much flat to avoid people buying in one region and moving to another. And there is the classic green box containing the gorgeous looking Air King. It also contains instruction manual, warranty card, and the little bezel protector, hang tag, and superlative chronometer certification tag there with the little hologram also. Oh, very nice. Nice if a little plasticky. At least when you do pass it on to your firstborn, the packaging is going to be in decent condition, unlike some of the older Omega boxes which disintegrated as soon as they left the dealer. That price point at just under 8,000 Aussie dollars puts it a little bit ahead of the Oyster Perpetual, but a little bit cheaper than the Rolex Explorer. It also means that this watch is considerably cheaper, 2,000 Aussie dollars anyway, cheaper than the Rolex Milgauss, which is quite interesting because this watch shares quite a lot of its componentry in common with the Milgauss, including the 40mm Oyster case, and indeed the movement contained within. Now, the Air King used to be Rolex's base model. They deleted it a few years ago, really to make way for the Oyster Perpetual, which arrived the following year. They then resurrected this one in 2016 with quite a different look, quite a distinctive look, shall we say. There's clearly elements of the Explorer there with those white gold Arabics at 3, 6 and 9, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff as well going on in the dial, as we shall discuss a little later on. So 40mm in diameter, thickness of just about 13.5. We've got a lug tip to lug tip of 48mm. 20mm lug width, tapering down to just over 15, giving this Oyster Clasp a width of just under 16. It's about 15 3/4 according to my calipers. Sized up for Mr. X's wrist. His wrist is pretty much the same size as mine, about 7 inches. This one weighs in at 155 grams, so in that kind of spot on weight bracket. And this is the Oyster case made out of oyster steel. Now this is 904L steel, more corrosion resistant and stronger generally than the 316L stainless steel, which is more commonplace on lesser watches than Rolex. We have a mixture of brushed and polished surfaces. As you can see, there's brushed lug tips. We've got a polished smooth bezel, polished sides on that Oyster case. We've got a screw down crown, giving this watch 100 meters of water resistance. And we've obviously got a dead flat sapphire crystal with plenty of AR coating on the dial. The bracelet is also made of 904L steel. As you can see, Mr. X has given this one a thorough going over. He has worn this diving, he assures me as well. He certainly doesn't keep these. They are not safe jennies. He wears all of his watches. And this Oyster clasp, a little bit of a hinge there. Let me just get my nail underneath. You can see there's a hinge, and obviously you would expect a beautiful milled clasp at this price. A couple of stickers still on it. And we've got a really interesting type of micro adjustment here. You can flick it that way, taking it in by about half a centimeter or all the way out by half a centimeter as well. I have found this feature very useful myself on some of Sydney's hotter days. I've been able to adjust this over the course of the day a couple of times. Very nice. Not quite the glide lock you'll find on Submariners, but useful to have that little bit of on-the-fly adjustment. The classic Rolex crown on the clasp there as well. Now I'm not going to start screwing around with this one's case, so you'll have to look at the case back there. Classic Rolex, very, very plain indeed, with their own kind of screw down attachment system. Obviously a little bit of stickering still left on there, and solid end links. Very, very nice finishing throughout, as you would expect at this bloody price point, and very neat gaps, no gaps between the end links and the Oyster case, as you can see also. So the movement in this one is a Rolex in-house movement. It is the 3131, as mentioned, shared with the Milgauss. As such, it has the same anti-magnetic, magnetic resisting properties as the Milgauss, including a special parachrom hairspring to keep this one running accurately, even when subjected to strong magnetic fields. 48-hour power reserve, bidirectional winding, utterly silent. You cannot hear this movement winding at all. And as you can see it on the dial, it says superlative chronometer. This one is certified as a chronometer, tested. It generally runs plus or minus 2 seconds when housed in the case. So pretty phenomenal to have a movement running like that. As you can see, just a three-hander, hour, minute and second. No complications on this one. You pay a little bit more for your complications with Rolex. Now pop up a lume video. Kind of looks like Superluminova BGW9. It's got that same kind of ice blue, perhaps a little greenier than BGW9. It's actually Rolex's proprietary in-house lume. They call it Chromalight. Great to see those classic Mercedes hands at a lollipop and the big triangle at 12 all shining brightly. As much lume as you really need on a watch and no more. So what about this slightly unusual looking dial then? Clearly elements of the Explorer, but there's some elements that are unique to this Air King. Well, Rolex are sponsors of the UK's Bloodhound project, which is a land speed record attempt that started life in the early 2000s. They supply the cockpit instrumentation. I'll pop up a picture of them there, and as you can see, there are similarities between the instruments used in the Bloodhound project and in this Air King. Now, another friend of mine was mad keen on the Air King and was just about to pull the trigger on one when he spent a little too long one day analysing the mix of Arabic numerals on the dial. Now, he warned me, once you see this, you cannot unsee this. So, if you're considering this one but are a little OCD, perhaps you'd better skip ahead a minute. There are 4 zeros on the dial. There's a 1, 2 2s, 2 3s, a 4, a 6, no 7s, no 8s, 1 9, but there are 6 5s on the dial. It really is quite 5 heavy, quite biased towards 5, because they've gone for this every 5-minute around the outside there rather than just having the hour markers as would normally be the case. Now I'll pop up another picture there. This is actually a mock-up. Somebody did a Photoshop version of the Air King, but replacing the large Explorer style Arabics at 3, 6 and 9 with 15, 30 and 45. What do you think? I think it actually looks quite better. I think it looks a little more balanced. Perhaps we'll see a revision in the years to come where Rolex will bring that model into production. But for now, this is the one we've got, and slightly unusual looks it has too. And zoomed right in there, you can see those raised white gold Arabics at the 3, the 6 and the 9, everything else just printed. You've got the green logo matching the green second hand, the Air King, the old school Air King font there, and there's that new, relatively new distinctive Rolex printed continuously with a little crown on the chapter ring also. But never mind those slightly unusual and undoubtedly polarizing looks, how does this watch feel on wrist? Well, it feels pretty sensational. I have been wearing this one out and about with me around Sydney over the last week or two. Not all the time, but fairly regularly enough to get a feel for it, and it feels just right. Beautiful, comfortable case, and the weight distribution just about perfect. I think that's what you pay for with a Rolex. Apart from the name and the investment opportunity that comes with a Rolex, you get something that is so well thought out, just feels fantastic on the wrist and doesn't look ostentatious. It doesn't particularly look like you're wearing 8 large on your wrist, even though you are quite a discreet one in spite of that polished bezel and those polished Arabics on the dial. And zoomed out looks great, given a little bit of extra perspective there as well. I could definitely handle the 39. I think I would probably go for a slightly smaller case rather than this slightly larger 40. Definitely I would choose this one over the Milgauss though. Not a big fan of the Milgauss. I think it's a little bit glitzy, a little bit glamorous, this Air King with that black dial. Much more my cup of tea. Doesn't it look sensational? So a beautifully made watch that wears beautifully, will last you a lifetime. You can pass it on to the next generation and it will be worth more money to them than you paid for it in the first place. Doesn't sound too bad all in all, does it? Not sure that this is the model I would choose. The looks are a little cluttered on the dial compared to some other Rolex models, but it wears very nicely indeed. I have enjoyed my first Rolex experience. I do hope it is not my last Rolex experience, given that Mr. X owns another 13 of the things. You can be fairly assured that you will see some of his other Rolexes on the channel in the future. So there you have it then, my first Rolex review. Big thank you to Mr. X for allowing me to have some extended wrist time with his Air King. It is a gorgeous watch, one that felt instantly comfortable and at home on my wrist. That kind of just right thing that Rolexes seem to manage, like few other brands can do it. I wore this one out and about and I didn't feel like I was wearing a big money, show-off, flashy, gaudy watch on my wrist. In fact, I really enjoyed wearing it out and about. Can I see myself buying one of these? Well, perhaps not. It's a little bit unusual. That dial, as interesting as it is, interesting is a great euphemism for being a little bit odd. I could see myself definitely with an Explorer or an Oyster Perpetual instead though. Thanks for watching. See you in the next